Freyxh stopped soaking her front and looked over her shoulder at him. "What are you doing?" "Washing you," Jason said absently. "I've got hands. I can do it myself." He noticed that she wasn't shying away from him though, which would have been pretty easy to do. The bathtub they were in was absurdly big, probably intended for a full group of Shilvanti rather than just one, and a human. Freyxh had wanted to hop straight into the shower to get to the fun more quickly, but the second Jason had seen the massive bathtub, he'd almost immediately started running the water. A shower was nice and all, but nothing beat relaxing in a massive bowl of hot water. He'd been right too. He could almost feel the exertions of the day being eased out of him by the warm liquid, which is why he was feeling a bit more handsy than he might otherwise. Shilvanti don't wash each other? Freyxh shook her head even as Jason's soapy hands ran over her back. A father or mother with a small child might, one not yet old enough to wash themselves. The insinuation being that she was very much old enough to wash herself. Jason hummed. You guys don't have social grooming? To be fair, humans didn't do it all that much either in modern society, which was a shame given the proven therapeutic effects. Still, between two lovers, or more accurately, soon-to-be friends with benefits, who were sharing a shower or a bath, it was pretty normal. One of his old girlfriends had been very much into it when sharing a shower, and the habit had grown on him. He'd even taken a short massage course with her. Well, humans do, he said. It's relaxing for us. And after the evening he'd just had, he needed some relaxation. Freyxh still looked a little dubious, but didn't stop him as she turned back around. Silence reigned between them, broken only by the soft lapping of the water. You don't have to do it, you know, Freyxh said finally. The massage? Jason cocked his head, unconsciously adopting the Shilvanti gesture for confusion, despite the fact that Freyxh had her back to him. Sex, the woman said through gritted teeth, like the words were being dragged from her. After what happened, I understand if you didn't. If you feel like you owe me or some shit, don't. Jason had to smile. It was kind of cute how the platoon's loner badass was trying to be all noble. His hands moved up to massage her shoulders. Part of him was slightly worried that Shilvanti muscle structure would be different enough that it wouldn't work on the alien, but he felt the usual muscles tensing under his fingers before they relaxed. That's sweet of you to say, he smiled, enjoying watching the alien practically melt under his ministrations. Freyxh was carrying a lot of tension in her shoulders, but I'm fine. He meant it too. Was what happened earlier shitty? Certainly. It had also been strange. Very strange. Was a foursome with 3 aliens in a bathroom his idea of a bad time? Not particularly. It sounded a lot like the setting for a cheap porno, to be honest. Of course, he knew objectively that had something happened, he wouldn't have enjoyed it. The very notion would have left him feeling used, violated. It hadn't happened, though, and the idea in abstract didn't horrify him in the same way he imagined it might if he had been a woman. Rape wasn't really something he thought about much as a guy. It wasn't a source of dread for him because the idea that it might happen to him was so unlikely in his mind. Or at least it hadn't been before the Shilvanti entered the equation. Human cultural consciousness hadn't quite caught up to account for their presence. Sex was almost a universal positive in his mind. For a sexual experience to be a negative for him, personally, was odd. That was it, really. It was just too strange for it to have really gotten to him. Sure, his guts churned with a whole bunch of complex feelings when he thought about what might have happened, but he could put them from his mind. He wasn't dwelling on it. That was the trick, and if he was going to keep doing that until it stopped working. If it stopped working. Was it healthy? Perhaps not, but it was how he operated. Repress, compartmentalize, continue. Not all that different from a lot of guys, to be honest. So yeah, he was going to continue as he had before. He wasn't about to let that experience ruin this for him. He'd intended to get laid tonight, and 3 asses weren't going to stop him from doing that. He still knew he'd been talking it over with Tarsal when he got back to the dorms. He had a feeling the sarcastic little alien would, if not understand, then at least prove a better listener than the others. Nothing against them, certainly, but there was something to be said for being able to speak to someone who was nominally of the same gender. He could almost hear Freyx's unsure frown. Are you sure? Jason reached round to tweak a blue nipple, getting a small jolt from the alien. I'm sure. Let's just stop talking about it and enjoy the moment. The alien turned round to glare at him as he grinned impishly at her, but settled back down with a barely inaudible harumph. It was cute. Very cute. Who knew teasing the 7-foot murder tank could be so fun? It was pretty clear Freyxh wasn't used to being massaged, which, given her words, wasn't surprising. She was certainly susceptible to it though, as she pressed up against the side of the tub, dripping arms hanging out as her purple breast ballooned against the tiles. From behind, it was quite the erotic visage. Jason was put in mind of a great cat, or perhaps an Amazon huntress, lazing in the sun. A lot of the time, he cursed the circumstances that had brought him into the Shovanti military. Moments like this, though, they made it worth it. Grinning, he continued his massage. You've got some big knots in here, he said, as he really used his thumbs to smooth them out of the rope-like muscles of her back. Knots? Freyxh not quite moaned, as he pressed his hands into her soapy and surprisingly soft flesh. He was surprised to see some scars here and there, minor nicks mostly, but more than he'd expected. It's... never mind, he said, as he moved his hands down the soft purple skin of her back. Just as he predicted, the base of her spine was especially tense, and he couldn't help but smile at the stifled beep that came from the woman as he pressed his fingers into the bundle of muscles there. It wasn't all that surprising. The Shovanti were big and powerful, but they had large breasts to accompany that size. That kind of weight probably put all kinds of strain on their backs. What are you... Freyxh gasped, twitching as he worked his magic. It was all kinds of fun, playing the massive, powerful alien's body like a fiddle. Just easing out some of that tension, he chuckled. Who knows? After I'm done, you might be less of a bitch? A little crude perhaps, and certainly a way to offend a woman. Freyxh was less a woman than Shovanti though, and a marine besides. Worse got slung around the dorms on a pretty regular basis. I'm not a bitch, she grunted out as she arched her back once more. A survey of our dorm might say otherwise. They're a bunch of pretty little bitches, Freyxh said, frustration audible. I like being alone. Is that such a fucking crime? In a different profession, no. This wasn't a different profession though. They were training to be Marines, and a large part of that involved people coming together as a team. Shared adversity formed powerful bonds. Anyone who chose not to become part of those bonds became an outsider by default, and there were few things a closely bonded group could abide less than an outsider among their number. Jason moved Freyx's white locks out of the way as his hands slid up the woman's soapy back to the base of her neck, seeking out the joints there. It was a testament to just how relaxed the alien was becoming that she didn't protest. He had a feeling a few hours earlier she would have balked at anyone touching that vulnerable spot. Though it probably helped that he was the weaker gender in this situation, and thus less of a threat. He used a momentary pause as his hands moved to think over how to phrase what he might say next. He hadn't gotten into the bath with the intention of this being a therapy session. He had mostly been thinking with his lower brain at the time, but now that he was here, he figured it might be a good opportunity to at least work to improve Freyx's standing with the others. He owed her that much, as a fellow member of the cadre if nothing else, even ignoring what she'd done for him earlier. That act, along with the last few minutes of conversation, proved there was more to her than just being an antisocial asshole and the group's black sheep. How much more remained to be seen, but he owed it to the cadre to at least try and unearth some of it. No, it's not a crime, he said slowly, but fuck, try having a single conversation with someone, anyone back on base when we get back. I just said... I know, Jason said, placatingly. I get it. You want to be alone, the big, badass lone bitch. Unfortunately, that's not going to fly in our current surroundings. As it stands, everyone seems to think that you think you're better than them. Freyxh shifted slightly, and Jason got the feeling that his previous statement wasn't entirely untrue. Freyxh did think she was better than the others. or at least tougher, which was part of why she was so determined to win at everything and refused to accept help unless it was thrust upon her. Why? Shitty home life or rampant feminine machismo, which was apparently called Marianismo, according to his latest datanet search. Point was, he didn't know. He didn't much care either. A single conversation for 5 minutes where you don't taunt or insult anyone could go a long way to dispelling that perception, though. His hand shifted lower once more, tracing her spine. Something to show that you aren't standing on some pedestal looking down on everyone. Freyxh shifted again, though this time for a different reason, as he worked out another kink. Who the fuck would... she started to say, only to stop, changing her tack. Who should I talk to? As you said, most of the cadre won't even give me the fucking time of day anymore. Nui or the twins would be a pretty safe bet, Jason said. Of his small list of associates, they would probably respond. The usually affable Rysha, the almost as surly Adrilla, and the frosty Tarsal were all right out for a bunch of different reasons. There might have been others in the cadre, but he didn't know them well enough. Nui would love to see you be brought into the fold. She only really cares about the unit functioning properly, and despite your best efforts, or maybe because of them, both of the twins think you're cool. Birds of a feather and all that, the mini-rebels looking up to the group's big rebel. The twins, huh? Freyxh said, though Jason didn't miss the hint of distaste that came over her face. Too excitable. Too preppy. Jason almost slugged her in the kidney right there. Big or not, she'd have felt it. Fortunately, he got his irritation under control. You aren't exactly a catch yourself. To his surprise, Freyxh chuckled quietly. No idea what that means, but I can guess. And I suppose not. Still, Nui is decent enough. Doesn't talk too much. Talking with her wouldn't be too intolerable. Jason rolled his eyes, but he figured that was the best he was going to get. Fuck me. It's a conversation, not surgery, he muttered. You're talking to me just fine. We're about to fuck, Freyxh said. I can't put up with a lot if it means getting her twat pricked. This massage thing is really fucking good too. Charming. I bet you're rolling in guys with lines like that. He was smiling, but it was kind of brittle. He'd actually be kind of pissed if the woman had just been queuing to get laid, and that wasn't an irritation he'd expected to experience, let alone be on this side of. More guys than you might think, Freyxh said. As you said, the bad girl aesthetic has an appeal all on its own. Guys who never got enough love from daddy, they're a sucker for it. Jason resisted the urge to sigh. Perhaps it was too much to hope that Freyxh would learn a little tact after heart-to-heart and a little conversation. Still, it certainly made his plan to work out his current frustrations at the world by fucking the shit out of her a lot less morally compromised. He certainly couldn't have done the same to the earnest Rysha, the excitable twins, or even the quietly kind Nui. Freyxh, though, she was a perfectly acceptable target. Up, on your knees. He patted her on the back. Turning her head round to smile sardonically at him over her shoulder, the alien nonetheless obliged. Going to do my legs next? I've got to admit. Jason had no idea what she had to admit as he slid smoothly into her, eliciting a surprised squeak. This is Old Man Henderson speaking! We're skipping the sex scene for this abridged video! If you want to listen to the whole thing, make sure you've signed up to Patreon, like I have. No way you numbers be keeping me women! According to the Pillars of Enlightenment, a soul that was pure in mind but foul in act would not enter the forest of eternal bounty upon death, nor would they be dragged down into the sea of heavy souls where all those who were wicked in life dwelled. Instead, they would be held in the borders of life and death, in a state of the most sublime ecstasy and soul-rending agony, held in balance until they could once more enter the cycle of rebirth to attempt enlightenment on the mortal plane once more. Nui had also thought that was a load of horse shit, despite the best attempts of her deeply conservative parents. You lived, you died, and then you rotted in the ground. For the last few minutes, though, she'd been forced to concede that maybe those religious whack jobs were onto something. Gah! She most definitely did not whimper, as the human slid into her well-lubricated entrance once more. At this point, she could do little more than lie down on the bed, head down, ass up, as the human rode her like a prized Turox. Freyxh would be no help. The surly recruit was sprawled out on the bed next to her, Jason's previous deposits leaking from her spread legs like a river as she slept like the dead. If the dead snored. Point was, her fellow recruit had essentially been fucked into a coma, a fate she was not too far off from herself. Fortunately, or perhaps unfortunately, the end came before that happened. Jason let out a grunt and knew he felt something warm trickle inside her. Barely anything, which at least told her that human virility had some limits, ridiculous as they seemed to be. Spent, Jason collapsed onto the bed, sweat covering his heaving chest. Nui did much the same, everything from her legs to her arms aching with the most delightful soreness. The two, no, three, lay there for a time, each basking in the afterglow. "So, what happened last night?" she finally asked, propping her head up on one arm. "My memory kind of drops out after drink free." "Oh, now you want to talk?" the human asked, a slight goofy grin on his face as he stared at the ceiling. "After practically jumping me after you and Freyxh discovered my warning wood?" Nui cocked her head at him. It wasn't her fault that human Mers was so ridiculously lewd as to pop a boner each morning. Meh, it didn't matter. She was much more interested in the events of last night, and how they'd ended with her, Freyxh and Jason, having a threesome. Funnily enough though, she didn't exactly remember having any deposits in her before they started the morning activities. Had Freyxh hogged them all? Jason told her. She took it as well as could be expected. "I'll wring that skinny little bitch's neck!" Nui raved as she not quite limped around the room. Freyxh said that would be a bad idea, Jason pointed out. He wasn't against it per se, he was just trying to get a better idea of the situation. Nui paused to look at where the woman was still snoring. "Oh, she's right. It would be a terrible idea. You don't fuck with the interior even if they fuck with you first." Ah well, that was disappointing for both him and her. The older woman looked like she wanted to pound the wall with her fists. "Still doesn't mean I'm not tempted," she grunted finally. "Interior's always been bad, but these last few years they've been like a rabid dog. That new director of theirs." "So, we're not going to do anything?" Jason asked, struggling to keep the irritation out of his voice. He pretty much accepted that would be the case last night, but in the light of the day, it still stung. Nui looked at him sympathetically, basically collapsing into a chair. "Not much we can do. Sure, we could report it, but the interior would just make it disappear. Hell, they'd probably turn it back around on us, charge us all with something." Jason's hand tightened into a fist. The moment was interrupted, though, by the sound of the hotel door opening. In staggered the three missing members of their party, each looking thoroughly hungover and carrying little plastic boxes. "Well, hello, ladies." Nui smiled, all signs of her previous anger hidden away. "It looks like you've had a fun evening." None of the three younger Shilvanti said anything as they stumbled to a halt. The trio were staring wide-eyed, vision switching from the two well-fucked women in the room and Jason's own nude form. "Oh, come on!" Viesha howled, breaking the silence as she threw her little plastic container onto a nearby table. "I kind of expected this might happen with Nui, but Freyxh too?" Her twin looked just as aggravated, especially after he struck out with that cute guy with the earrings. Viesha whirled on her sibling. "I kept telling you that you were coming on too strong." "Me?" Viesha scowled. "You were the one who were practically humping his leg." "You were too. Stop yelling, my head is killing me." "Your head? I feel like mine is..." Jason turned his gaze away from the bickering twins, even as he found himself chuckling at their antics. Instead, his focus turned to the one member of the trio, who hadn't spoken yet. "You okay, Rysha?" he asked. "We were all a little worried when you didn't show up last night." Which was true in a sort of offhand, barely considered way. He and Freyxh had bigger problems at the time, and Nui had been passed out until an hour ago. The three were big girls. They could look after themselves. "I didn't sleep with anyone," Rysha said quickly, snapped from her trance. "We slept on a bench. I didn't cheat. That was the twins." Jason glanced over to where the twins were still bickering, before turning back to Rysha. Well, even if you had managed to land a guy at the club, it wouldn't be cheating given that we're not in a relationship, he pointed out. Yrrol opened her mouth as if to say something before shutting it and nodding morosely. Jason almost felt a little bad. He hadn't said anything wrong though. They were friends, but that was it. He liked Yrrol, even if he ignored her constant attempts to come onto him. She was a funny goofball who was constantly upbeat. She lit up a room just by being in it with her endless, innocent optimism. Some of the other members of the cadre seemed to find it grating, but Jason honestly found it endearing. Perhaps it was because it was such a contrast to his own outlook. It's sweet that you were willing to miss out for me, though, he admitted. Yrrol's frown turned almost instantly into a shy smile. Jason smiled back. Even as he did, he found himself wondering if he was leading her on by being polite. He just wanted to cheer her up a bit, though. Was this the kind of shit women on Earth had to worry about? People taking their friendliness for something more? That sucked. Fortunately, he could soothe his conscience with the fact that he did intend to sleep with Yrrol eventually. After all, they both wanted it. Just not now, he thought, as he felt a twinge of protest from his slightly chafed nethers. Both Freyxh and Nui seemed to think he was some kind of sex god, but he was, most assuredly, all too mortal. 5 times in one night was definitely pressing his youthful virility to his utmost limits, even with the koollman effect in play. He probably wouldn't even be looking at another member of the opposite sex for a good few days after this. Deliberately covering himself with a bedsheet, he glanced at the box in Yrrol's hands. So, what have you got there? Yrrol's momentary disappointment at the loss of her eye candy disappeared as she walked over with the proffered item. The twins and I were hungry when we woke up on the bench. Well, they woke up on the bench, I was on the grass. Point is, as we were walking back to the hotel, we found a stall that had genuine human food from Earth. Yrrol slid open the box, displaying the food items within. Apparently they're called waffles. Jason smiled down at the circular slices of syrup covered fried batter within. Pancakes, he corrected. They're called pancakes.